So here in section 21.1, the textbook gets you thinking about Europe in the 16th century. Because the simplest definition of the High Renaissance is just a time period, the 1500s. Although we're going to narrow that down. We're going to actually see that what we call the High Renaissance is really the beginning of the 1500s, and then things get more complicated. And that complication is really built into what they explain as the character of this time period. The 16th century was an age of social, intellectual, and religious ferment that transformed European culture. I love that they chose the word ferment, right? This word that is based on the organic process of yeast bubbling and expanding and transforming so that you get the dough into the bread. And really the sense of a lot of activity happening. And part of this is really warfare. Continual armed conflict triggered by expansionist ambitions. So the idea of expansion is a big part of the High Renaissance. Expansionist ambitions, we will see the art is very ambitious because it is geared toward patrons who are claiming bigger territory, wanting more power, and in conflict with other rulers. The theme of humanism continues, but they make an interesting point here that the engagement with humanistic texts, with classical sources, is becoming deeper. There's a critical exploration of new ideas. So as if over time, the reading and reflection and philosophy based on humanist texts is becoming more thoughtful and critically engaged. This is very important. Cartographers began to acknowledge the Earth's curvature and the degrees of distance. We are getting an age of exploration, of navigating by ships to territories where Europeans haven't been. This is going to be profound because this is, of course, going to lead to things like the settling of America, colonization of many territories, and horribly, the enslavement of peoples in a system where these new territories are meant to create wealth for capitalist investors. So that's coming up ahead. And that's why this period, the 16th century, is referred to by historians as the early modern period. The conditions of the modern world are being laid down. And part of that is we already know about the printing press, this tremendous increase in the rate of production, so we have the spread of knowledge, which we started to talk about in the last modules. This is important. They write that at the start of the 16th century, England, France, and Portugal were nation states under strong monarchs, something we haven't seen before. Let's consider the meaning of this term nation state, since it's a two-part word. And here's a good online source from Pennsylvania State University. What is a state? Okay, so state refers to the governmental entity, the sovereign power that exercises control. So we have the state consisting of Congress, the White House, the state congressional, and other powers in California. A state is tied to a territory, and it has a bureaucracy, right? Because the state is the power that can do things and can monopolize functions. What is referred to as a nation? A nation is a group of people who see themselves as a cohesive and coherent unit based on shared cultural or historical criteria. So the nation is the people's experience of belonging, and this is a socially constructed unit. This is not given by nature. We are not born feeling like we're Americans. We learn this based on how our socialization occurs. So a nation state is a kind of hybrid idea, that there is a homogeneous nation that really coalesces together, that is governed by its own sovereign state, and the people are one. So we have these strong nation states, England, France, and Portugal, which are actually embarking now on processes of colonization to claim territories elsewhere in the world and to exploit labor sources. But then we also have regions like the German-speaking region in Central Europe, which are much smaller units of power, principalities run by the prince, some free cities. So they want you to understand that there's a mixture of kind of political units that has to do with which are larger, more massive powers and which are smaller regional powers. And so you get some kinds of states, such as Charles V, who is emperor of the Habsburg Holy Roman Emperor, who has tremendous territory in unconnected parts, Spain speaking Spanish, the Netherlands speaking Dutch and German, and then vast territories in the Americas since this age of exploration has begun. So this is part of this expansionist idea at the time. We now have a ruler who has territory in the world that had been the territory of the indigenous peoples of the Americas, now encountering Europeans. And then Italy is still not a nation state, but rather chopped up into smaller states. What I'd like you to appreciate is this situation is ripe for battles of conquest and rivalry. The other important point here is the Pope's incessant demands for money. This is a key idea. They need money for a lot of reasons. They are, remember, rebuilding the whole city of Rome, which was a disaster zone in the beginning of the 1400s. They're going to rebuild St. Peter's. We'll talk about that. And especially this Pope Julius II, who has very grand taste in art. And he's going to actually start selling indulgences for your sin. You can buy your way into heaven. And this is going to really disgust people. And it is going to lead to an actual religious revolution where there will be a breaking away from the Catholic Church. So be aware that a lot is going on. This is why ferment is the word. It's a kind of bubbling brew of intensity.